Hey, are you a VTuber? Yeah. Do you play Apex Legends? Yep. Do you hate dropping frames mid-combat, lagging, while running VTube Studio, streaming, and playing Apex Legends at the same time? Good! Well, guess what? Stupid piece of shit. Because it's Season 13, and in Season 13, I decided it's finally time to make an Apex Settings guide for VTubers. So the goal is to increase your FPS while playing the game and running VTube Studio at the same time. Because, you know, we all want a little bit of that smooth boba in our mouths, you know what I mean? That smooth frame rate, 240 hertz cap, gonna be super gliding like a motherfucker. Let's start with the simple part, which is in-game settings. So in-game settings, display mode, run at full screen, better performance at full screen. There is no contest on whether or not, you know, full screen, window, full screen, so on and so forth is better. Full screen gives you better performance through and through. For aspect ratio, I run native. I have switched between 16:10 and 16:9, but right now I do prefer 16:9 native. That's, for me, that gives me the access to my next bit, which is my resolution, which is 1920 by 1080. That is a 16:9 aspect ratio. I don't recommend running anything over 1920 by 1080. Anything that runs over that is going to be A, more difficult for your computer to process while you're streaming, because think of it, your GPU and CPU have to allocate for running the game first and foremost, and B, recording that game and then streaming it to Twitch's or YouTube servers. So you want to have this 1920 by 1080, or if you run 1610 stretched, you know, 1680 by 1050, whatever your preference is, but I would not recommend going higher than 1920 by 1080. Brightness, really personal preference, anywhere between 50% and 70%. I run anywhere 50, 60, 70 at any given time, depending on what I want to do. FOV, I run max 110. Some people don't like running 110 FOV. You can run a little bit lower, but keep in mind, there is a very small impact on performance when you do run a wider field of view, because your game is rendering more at once, right? Your camera is seeing more. FOV ability scaling. I run this disabled because certain abilities, if you're an Octane main or a Bloodhound main, certain abilities will change your FOV. And that FOV can actually cause you to miss, because sensitivity in this game, right, your mouse sensitivity, is relative to your field of view. If I use Octane Stim, my field of view doesn't do anything with it disabled. With it enabled, you'll notice that when I stim, my field of view actually zooms in and then pulls out. It can cause you to have weird inconsistencies in your aim and cause you to actually miss your shots. So always run with FOV ability scaling off. Sprint view shake, minimal. You don't want to be looking like you're walking over speed bumps at any given time. It's not fun. It makes me sick sometimes. So now we're going to move on to the advanced section. VSync disabled. Never run it on. It adds input delay. It makes your game feel like shit. If you have the option for Nvidia Reflex, which I believe most Nvidia users do now, I'm not entirely sure. Enable plus boost, always. Reduces system latency. Makes your game go fast, feel a lot better than with it off. Adaptive resolution FPS and super sampling, just leave these at 0 or disabled. Anti-aliasing, personal preference, really. Some people like to run none, some people like TSAA. Running it off causes for a slightly sharper image, but you can see flickering of like edges of textures at range. But with it on, you'll see that the game, it looks quite a bit smoother around models, so that can help with target acquisition. So it's not a terrible idea to experiment with having on or off. Texture streaming budget, I have mine on high. People do like to run it on none, which makes your game look like clay. It doesn't have a huge impact on your FPS. However, what I would recommend is running it like mid to high area, so that way you get great visual clarity, you're able to pick out targets easier. But if you're playing in something like ranked or tournaments or whatever, put it down to low. Quick high level, full screen, 16:9 native, 1920 by 1080, anywhere for brightness from 50 to 70%. Field of view, run max, 110. FOV ability scaling, disabled entirely. Sprint view shake, minimal. VSync, disabled. Nvidia Reflex, enable plus boost if you can. Adaptive resolution and adaptive super sampling, 0 and disabled. Anti-aliasing, TSAA or none, personal preference. Texture streaming budget. 3 to 4, mid to high, you can run it on low or none. Texture filtering bilinear. Ambient occlusion quality, disabled. Sun shadow coverage, low. Sun spot detail, low. Volumetric lighting, disabled. Dynamic spot shadows, disabled. Model detail, effects detail, impact marks, ragdolls, all of that low. Because we don't give a shit about that quality. We care about frames. Steam settings, super important. One of the biggest things I would recommend, disable Steam overlay. This will help with VTube Studio and for Apex and for anything else. In order to do that, what you want to do is go to Steam up here in the top left, go to settings. It will bring up something that shows your account. I'm not going to show you that because I don't want everyone to know my account. But you come down to the in-game tab, the Steam overlay. Make sure all this is unchecked. Don't have that enabled in-game. Apex launch options now. In order to get to your launch options, you come to your Steam library, you right-click on Apex Legends, you go to Properties. This will come up with the General tab. In the General tab, I'm going to copy these and put these in the description of the video. But your launch options, dev, full, FPS max. I run 240, so I cap my frames at 240 hertz. What I would recommend for this is the refresh rate of your PC's display. So if you run a 60 hertz display, FPS underscore max 60. If you run 144, FPS underscore max 144, 165, so on and so forth. And then I have my auto exec command here. I'll be linking my auto exec if you want access to it. I'll probably have it in my Discord. Nvidia Settings. In order to get to your Nvidia settings, right click on your desktop, Nvidia control panel. Go to your manage 3D settings page and copy all of these settings. You can slow down the video, pause it, whatever you want to do, but make sure you copy all these, all of the settings that apply. Just copy all these settings. These are the ones that I've compiled from pretty much every other Apex low latency settings guide, whatever may help. This is what helps entirely for getting your VTube Studio and Apex to run super clean when you're playing Apex and streaming it. VTube Studio settings, important. There's actually not a lot that we need to do here. This is actually kind of interesting. In order to make VTube Studio run really well, one of the most important things that you can do is actually right-clicking on it, right-clicking VTube Studio again, and then running it as administrator. You always want to run VTube Studio as an administrator because it does allow for higher process affinity. Your CPU will take better advantage of it and give it a little bit more responsiveness. If you want to make sure that VTube Studio runs as administrator all the time without you having to right-click it and then right-click again and then run it as administrator, you can right-click it again, go to Properties, and then under Compatibility tab, and you make sure this box is checked, run this program as administrator, and then click Apply and OK. Now that we have done arguably one of the most impactful changes to VTube Studio, which is really just simply running it as administrator, just take a quick little deep dive into Denchi's lag troubleshooting guide. So we've already set up VTube Studio to run as administrator. Great. Checking logs and checking Windows Task Manager is really just for diagnosis. Something that's important to do is when you are streaming, turn off virtual webcam and NDI. Another thing on the back of that, which is kind of small here, make sure you're running VTube Studio or capturing VTube Studio as game capture when you're in OBS. Super important. Game capture seems to work better for it. Not entirely sure why, I'm not that smart, but it does perform better when you're running that. Simple one, turn off other apps. Apps really, you don't need anything like, Windows Maps to be running in the background because why? Turning off G-Sync. We already did that in my Nvidia settings section. Capping your FPS and your graphics card driver. Not super important, but can be helpful if you're on a lower end system. And that is all for this video. Before I go, however, there's a few resources that I find super helpful that are linked in the description below. If you do want to do a little more in-depth reading, please feel free to take a look at Calypto's low latency guide, as well as Denchi's lag fix and troubleshooting guide on the VTS GitHub. If there is anything that is unclear or was unclear in this guide, please comment below, let me know what it is, and I'll try and help. And finally, if this video did help you, please leave a like and consider subscribing.